I'm Sam Baker, creator of The Shift, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the first fiction book club of the year with Tracy Sierra, author of the absolutely bloody terrifying Nightwatching. Imagine that you're home alone in a blizzard. You've gone to bed and you hear a noise on the stairs. Mel, I'm just doing this to frighten you because I know you haven't read it. Not the kind of noise all old houses make, the kind of noise that tells you definitively that someone else is in the house. They're on the stairs. Hang on, I had to let someone else in then, stole my thunder, and they're on the way to your children's bedrooms. What do? You're about to spend 350 pages inside the head of a woman in precisely this situation, trying to protect her small children from an intruder who is hell-bent on hunting them down. Prepared to be frightened, wrong-footed, and forced to confront prejudices you would have sworn blind that you didn't have. Tracy is joining us from New England, where she's an attorney and lives in a 300-year-old colonial era home which you'll be able to see behind her, but only a little bit. You can see much more of it on TikTok and Instagram if you're interested, but we'll talk about that a bit later. Um, this home has helped her produce one of the most frightening thrillers I have ever read, and I have read a lot. Nightwatching is her debut, and I promise you it will keep you awake all night. I've seen it described as a feminist home invasion thriller, an action movie scenario with an every woman heroine, and one of the best thrillers I've ever read by both The Guardian and Shift Book Club alumni Jenny Godfrey. Usual deal, we will try not to spoil it because I know a couple of you, Mel, are too chicken to have read it yet. Please pop any comments or questions for Tracy in the chat as you think of them. We'll do questions at the end as usual, but also as usual, I'll raise them as we go if they fit the conversation. Welcome to the Shift Book Club, Tracy, from your spooky house.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here.
Um, so like right from the opening sentence, there was someone in the house. That's like tension to the max from like word one. Tell us, set it up for us. Tell us how that plays out.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think we've all kind of had that sort of fear where you hear a bump in the night and your thoughts immediately go to if someone is in the house. And at the time I wrote Night Watching, my kids were quite young, actually younger than the kids in the book itself. And um I was also home alone a lot. My husband's a doctor, and so those sort of fears were kind of on my mind. And I had also really just started trying to write seriously, and I had another book that was just getting turned down for being too slow at the start. So when I was thinking of Night Watching, I thought, this isn't going to be too slow from the start. We're going to get going right away into what I think is just a really primal and universal fear that everyone from every walk of life has had at some point.
So is where did the idea? So you started writing, you were quite a new mum,
Mhm.
and you started writing during lockdown. Is
Yeah.
that right?
Yes, Night Watching, I largely, sort of outlined and came up with the initial ideas during lockdown. And I joke that that's why it's set in my house and not in Paris or New York or something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. And why my home was just such a huge part of the inspiration for the book. It's also just this really beautiful, moody, atmospheric place. I know there in the UK, a 300-year-old home is not that old relatively for you guys and your history. But here in the US, that's significantly older than the United States itself. The home really kind of, especially I think for Americans, there's this very intense idea of New England being this sort of spooky, atmospheric place because it's you think of the Salem witch trials here and the Pilgrims and there's a lot of kind of dark history that started out here, but it was just such a great kind of spooky setting that allowed me to kind of talk about more than just the scary thriller scenario this woman finds herself in. It allows you to talk a lot about history and kind of how it plays into the present. And also, during lockdown, your home was such kind of this refuge, right, of place of safety. But you also, I think we were all feeling very trapped, right? And I think that comes through because, as I was thinking of these ideas and writing this book, it just struck me so much how that has kind of always been true for women. The home is your safe place, but it can also be traditionally has been kind of limiting in many ways. It's kind of held you in. So I wanted to kind of, in many ways, reclaim this idea of home as a woman's space as this powerful thing because the heroine of Nightwatching really does take every advantage that she has with her knowledge of her own space, her own small children, her own home and everything else.
So, what was it that came first for you? Because you get so many writers who say, "Oh, I start with the character," and then you get the other writers who like start with the plot. Or what did you start with? I wondered if it was even the house.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost hard for me to name one single thing because it kind of, I think for me, I've always loved scary stories. I'm just a scary story person. And I was thinking about the things that have kind of always frightened me the most. And this scenario is way up there. And then as I was poking at it, the sort of what would I do if, that we all do with the idea of a home invasion period, but also with plotting a novel. Well, what would I do if I were in this situation, right? And then kind of realizing that I could make a character who's a lot more capable, I would think, than I was. I think I'd probably be pretty doomed in such a scenario. And so then I think when I personally outline, I love a good plot. I need a plot for sure. But once I have a beginning, a middle, and end, for me, it's very much about character. And as I proceed writing, I'm kind of always ready to throw something out if I come up with something better, which I think happens a lot when you get to really know your characters. You understand how they would respond, what would happen next in a way you can't until you really are in a character's head.
So, without talking about the end, did you know the end at, at the beginning, when you started writing?
Uh, I had a different end actually. And then I think when I was about 30% through, I ended up kind of rewriting the outline. And by outline, I mean I outline very broadly. We're talking bullet points in a
Yeah.
notebook, right? I'm not one of these people who looks like, they're tracking a serial killer with like
Yeah,
post-its
yeah.
and lines to
Yeah, chords
push
and
pins.
yeah.
I am not that organized with it. I find that I think every single author has a different process for sure. But I kind of re-outlined the back half because in the beginning I had done things that to that I thought were what that character, what a person would be thinking and doing in that scenario. And so it sort of made me think through the back half a little differently. And so I had a ending, but not the ending is the answer.
And again, with no spoilers, can I ask, was it the same sort of outcome, but
Yeah,
not?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was a similar outcome. Always, yeah. Uh, it was, yeah. It was just kind of a different path, and I guess you could say just different levels of action from different characters.
Interesting. I'm dying to know. I want to talk a bit more about your house because your house is such a character. And like I said earlier, I kind of pointed you to Tracy's Instagram and TikTok. And I've been down a rabbit hole of spooky house this afternoon, like following your videos of your, and it is a spooky house. It looks spooky. It's got spooky vibes, and your cellar, oh my God. But it's got a real life kind of haunted house story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Did you hear that when you bought it?
No, we actually found out later about that particular story. Yeah, I did a video around this time last year, about it, but there's kind of a legend associated with the house. The house was in the same family until the 1850s. And then the last owner of the house was found, deceased in the well, and it was unclear how he'd ended up there. And then the house was abandoned until the 1940s, and it was just because it was a period of, economic decline for the area, basically. And there was some sort of infighting among the relatives about who owned it until that point. So we found out about that story because my husband, who's a doctor, had a patient who was this very old man who was local to us and said, "Wait a minute, I know your house. When I was a little kid, my older brother used to sneak in to that house when it was abandoned. That was the haunted house." And he told us
Yeah.
that story. And I'm big into history, and so I'm very familiar with our historical society folks, and contacted them, and they said, "Oh yeah, this is sort of a well-known legend, associated with the house." It is kind of funny though, because we didn't know that particular story, but we have a cemetery in the backyard, that houses the original family's relatives. So it's not as though we didn't know the place has a history. And I write in Nightwatching, that one thing that's always so interesting about living in a house like this is that people definitely find that kind of creepy and spooky, but at the end of the day, it's just very kind of visible and obvious in my house. And, the main character in Nightwatching, who's this very practical, mathematical woman who is not at all like me, but is like many women I admire, basically says that, you know, any piece of American highway would be more haunted than this house. And we don't like to kind of acknowledge the, invisible cycles of life. And when we're confronted with them, it makes us uncomfortable, the same way that kind of confronting history in the past in any real way can make us uncomfortable, because it isn't always, happy. So I think it was a really interesting legend. It went quite viral, which was hilarious. I felt like people were going to think, I was writing some ghost story, and Night Watching is not a ghost story. It's very much a thriller. But I joke that, yeah, the well ghost got me into into Newsweek somehow.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
crazy.
you actually have that hidden room, don't you, behind the fireplace in your house?
Yes. Yes. And that was one of the earliest things that, as I was thinking through that scenario, what would I do? My head immediately went to that room in my house, that little space. It's pinned, I think, on all my social medias, that room, and thinking, well, that would be where I'd go. I'm a slight person, and if I'm introducing kids into the scenario, there's not a lot of fighting I could do. There's not a lot of physical uh advantages I have. And I think that was more interesting for me to look at than, your Bruce Willis and Die Hard sort of tough guy scenario. So I immediately thought of that room, and yeah, once my head went there, I thought, I think I might have enough here for a long form project. When I get an idea, I never sure it's going to be enough for a novel like project until I really start digging in and doing my brainstorming, scribbling, and things. But that was when I thought, oh yeah, that would be a really cool setting, because you know um, the people who are always most scared of my house are always men. and I found it really interesting. And
Interesting.
yeah, and I actually put one of them in the book. He'll never know, but the guy who installed our washing machine when we moved in, and he's literally
Yes.
carrying a whole washing machine up the steps all by himself. And he's just going on and on about how brave I am to sleep in this house, and he could never because of the ghosts. I was sitting there thinking, you, sir, scare me so much more than any ghost ever could.
Yeah.
To me, that is a much more realistic fear. And I found it so interesting that, that was something that you could see was like visibly concerned about that. And I thought that was so interesting because in my mind, if I was built like him, I would not have a fear in the world. So,
Mm. It's it's so interesting, isn't it? Because I think and the thing that keeps coming through in the book, and it just comes through in practically every conversation you have in life at the moment, but that notion where the detective and her father-in-law, and that all there's no such thing as monsters and monsters don't exist. Well, ask any woman whether monsters exist, and she'll tell you you're wrong. But they're not figments of our imagination. They're the people that we encounter
yes,
every
and I
day.
think I think that's what really draws me to the thriller genre, especially because it does kind of explore, obviously, in plot-driven ways, I guess you could say, but it does explore sort of actual evil, right, in many ways, and sometimes that can be really hard to kind of look at, and think about, but at the same time, yeah, like I think when they have this feature on Amazon where it shows the most highlighted things in the book. And one of those is, her kid saying, "You said monsters didn't exist," and she apologizes and said, "I lied." And I think that
Mm,
it's one of those most highlighted because we all know that that's true as adults. And I think it's just a really sort of sad moment when you kind of stop believing in, the monster under the bed and start realizing what monsters really are.
yeah, it's like the kind of made me think about the obsessive lock checking that so many of us do, that I have done through so much of my life, that she does,
Mm.
and then the monster a woman is most likely to encounter is the one that's inside already.
Yes,
And
yes, yes.
I mean, I really love the way you play with that nightmare figure come to life, and the boogeyman, the monster under the bed, the corner. Where did the name the corner come from?
Um, you know, when my kids were really little, when they were having trouble falling asleep and they were scared of the dark, it was always, I'd say you have the night light on. Well, it doesn't reach over there, and they'd point to the corners. And it made me think too of my father-in-law is a military veteran, and he was in like Army intelligence. And whenever we would go out to eat at a restaurant or any public place, he'd always take the seat in the corner because for him it was surveilling the room and
Mm,
sort of
back
this
to the
situation.
wall and
Yeah, back to the wall so I can see everyone and no one can sneak up on me. And I remember asking him about that and him sort of describing it. And then later on when I was in college, I remember noticing some other guys in my life would do that. And I said, "Why do you do that?" And they'd say, "Oh, well, it's so I read online that like if guys should sit in the corner so you can survey." And so to me it was this very sort of like interesting thing, like it it gives you an advantage, right? Kind of almost a physical advantage in a way to be there. Someone like my stepdad had learned that in training. My friends in college, it was from some internet advice thing that they thought made them look tough. And so I thought that that was kind of a perfect summary of, that the, villain of the piece, the intruder, because he is kind of like he's definitely trying to have a physical advantage. He's enormous guy, and lurking in the shadows, right? But at the same time, anyone who targets women and children in many ways is just putting on a facade of strength, right? Like that is not in any way any sort of strength, right? And so I thought for me that was why I came up with that idea for the name. But it was also born of just how do you describe something that you can't really see, right? The mother sees him from a distance, the kids hear him, they don't really see him because they're hiding, and the kids aren't sure how to even describe him. So it was also just this sort of childlike way to refer to whatever's happening.
It was something that I didn't notice to begin with because I had noticed that your heroine, for want of a better way to describe her, um, that she was not named. And then when we were talking about the book, Di pointed out that actually none of the characters have names. And then it occurred to me that there's one character that has a name and it's the corner.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of questions in that sentence. So talk to us about that, about the decision not to name the main character or in fact any of the corners and any of the characters. And then, make the corner the only one with a name.
Yeah, I think, it's funny. The only other, I think the kids' stuffed animals have a name too. Like there's Pink Bunny or something like that, and that's it. Uh, it started off, I initially had chosen names, and then obviously, no spoiler, the beginning of the book is this woman realizing someone is in her house with her small children. She's hiding with them. So it's small children talking to their mother, and I was maybe I don't know, three or four. I'm a very linear drafter. I start at page one and work my way through and then go back through and revise. So I was maybe three or four chapters in when I realized I hadn't dropped any of the names yet because the mother is talking to her children with terms of endearment and this kind of stuff. And of course, the children aren't going to say, Linda instead of mom,
Yeah.
you know? So it was this very natural thing. And I thought, well, once it starts getting like really unnatural, maybe I'll switch it. But then I kind of started to like it because I think like a lot of uh thriller readers, but I think women in general, I consume a lot of true crime content. And for me, a lot of it's sort of weirdly comforting. Like I'm going to learn all these strategies to defeat these bad guys or whatever. But one thing that's really hard when you're reading true crime is it's so focused on the villain of the piece, right? By its
Mm.
nature. And each of the targets of that crime, whether they survived or not, they are kind of like woman 36 vanishes or whatever, they become anonymous and you can't really connect with them. But at the same time, this entire story is told in close third right. You're right with the heroine of the piece, right? But there's this certain amount of like distance you need from the main character within this book because as things develop, you start thinking, is this a reliable narrator? And I felt that by not naming her and in this sort of crime situation, it made her like one of the targets of the crime in a true crime scenario. And you start saying, well, I'm this person, 48, this happened to. Well, I may be a woman that looks similar who is also 48, but that's not me because, and you start trying to fill in all the blanks about why this bad thing could never happen to you, which is, I think, a very human reaction. You want to feel safe. You want to feel like the world is just. Sometimes it can play out as kind of blaming the victim, right? She did
Mm.
X or Y or Z, and I would never do that. And I wanted readers to kind of slowly, without even maybe realizing it, feel that doubt sneak in with that lack of names. It's also a very small cast of characters. And it's also kind of, in life, it's interesting how little we use other people's names, especially people who are authority figures, things like that. So my editors, when we were having our first conversation, they said, "Oh, is this going to be your thing, not naming characters in any books?" I said, "No, I don't think I'm ever doing this again." But for this book, it worked very well in kind of introducing the suspicion, whether you're conscious of it early on or not, that maybe she isn't reliable, creating this sort of emotional distance, even though you're right with her, and also just sort of examining like the way we define people, like she's a mother, she's through most of the novel, she is just mom and that or ma'am, and that's it.
Mm,
So it's sort of interesting like how we actually sort of define people like and if you look in the book how others address people kind of is their role like their prescribed role they're
yeah,
supposed to.
the job, actually. Yeah, you did pull that off so effectively. I mean, I'd love to know what everybody else thinks, but I went into it thinking, okay, I'm with her. I believe every word she says because that's who I am. And all the way through, well, for a long time, I was like sticking with her, sticking with her. And then I realized, like, probably three-quarters of the way through, that I was starting to have doubts. And even though that made me feel really uncomfortable, I started to try and think ahead and think, if I was in your shoes, you, the writer, where would I be going with this? Could she, could she not exactly not be telling the truth, but could she, could it be trauma because her husband died? Could it? And then I just thought, oh my God, listen to yourself. I mean, you make it so much, to be fair, you don't give her an easy time because you do give
Yeah, no,
the
don't.
guys more concrete evidence at some points. And you do, and then she has the self-doubt and the guilt and the shame and am I doing the right thing? So in a way, she feeds in to your doubt. I'd love to know, I mean, I think we can talk about this without spoiling. I'd love to know if anybody else started to think, you know, maybe she's not telling the truth. Do put in the chat if you've got a take on that. But tell us a bit more about her. Why you decided to make, because like you say, she's very competent and logical and like maybe from society's point of view and from the kind of authority figures point of view, she's too logical and too capable and not emotional enough. And you weren't crying when you told us that, but she's been othered most of her life. So tell us a bit about her backstory and how she becomes who she is.
Yeah, I think I think a lot of women specifically are kind of plagued with self-doubt. And I also think there's this, sense that you're always thinking, what would I have done? How would I have reacted whenever you're hearing any sort of a story? And one thing that I've definitely learned about any kind of emergency situation, which is what this is that it is almost impossible to predict your response. It's almost like a biological thing. Sometimes you may be in a situation that's really dangerous and you react really well and you're thinking, wow, I'm so great in an emergency. And then another time you just absolutely freeze and don't react well. And I think when there's something that involves this much fear, and it would be so disorienting, right? That of course she is going to have a huge amount of self-doubt. And I think when, you are kind of in her head and hearing that self-doubt, it can kind of make you doubt too. And that's what we all kind of do to ourselves, right? Like we end up, the self-doubt kind of can become a self-fulfilling prophecy where, others then doubt you, right? And it's a very hard thing to kind of step outside of for all of us. And but I thought to be in that scenario and uh, not have doubt would be silly. Right? I think she would be filled with doubts. And, I'm sympathetic to others in the book as well because it's very easy, right, to kind of pick and choose what is the most comforting thing, right? I mean, even she says very early on in the novel that, like chapter one, at one point, she thinks longingly, maybe I'm going crazy, right? Like maybe this isn't happening. Maybe this is a dream, like that would be so much better because then she would be safe. And so when anything bad happens, sometimes a lot of us want to think, no, it didn't, right? Like, they probably just overreacted or misunderstood. That guy isn't bad, It's more comforting for us all to not believe bad things a lot of the time. And I really kind of wanted to explore how hard it is for us to admit that bad things can happen to good people through absolutely no fault of their own. I think that really is quite scary.
Yeah, really. And it's interesting how many people are saying, that they did for brief moments start to doubt her and then, feel really bad, or like Di's actually said, feel a bit disloyal. Like, you know, like you're meant to be on her team and even you are not, even you are doubting her. And that's, you know, it's
Yeah, I mean, I think I did that on purpose, so sorry, but
yeah.
I
No, of course
manipulated
you did.
you.
You
Um,
did good.
Yeah, and I think it's as an attorney, a corporate attorney, but my pro bono always, which is doing work for free and volunteer, my pro bono stuff and the work I did in law school was a lot around sort of women's issues. So, helping shelters and helping get temporary restraining orders from spouses and things like this. And it was really illuminating and heartbreaking. But, you would see even, people who loved the survivor, family members, who, despite very obvious physical evidence, would still say, well, maybe this, maybe, oh, maybe you misunderstood. Oh, are you sure you didn't? They'd still have doubt because it's just again like a very difficult thing to face that evil can exist and you missed it, right? Or that you didn't fully listen, right? Or pick up on it. And I think it's very hard for people to acknowledge that and to kind of admit that they were wrong about things. And yeah, I think just as all human beings, that's something I wanted to kind of like poke at a little bit. I think it also just really adds to kind of the scary, unsettling nature of of the
Mm.
story itself.
And did that, that work you've done, the kind of your kind of sideline, if you like, um, did that play into because you've written a short story, The Burr, as well, haven't you? And that is also really about women being failed by institutions and disbelieved, or, what a perfect victim looks like. Is that something you set out, that you wanted to set out to do with this, as well as the kind of here's an action thriller, but with a female hero, so she doesn't have the kind of the great big gun and the muscles, and she needs to use other. Did you also want to kind of pull apart the victim blaming and gaslighting and
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. On the flip side of that, in law school, I also worked in law enforcement for the U.S. Attorney's Office, which are the prosecutors. So in that, I worked their federal level, so it was like working with FBI as law enforcement officers and stuff that summer. And I very quickly figured out I was not cut out for that life. So much stress. But it was interesting because I felt like I did get insight into both sides of institutions and the way they work and what it's like coming to them as, someone trying to protect yourself and what it's like being on the other side and trying to kind of parse through and find out what's true and honestly kind of get stuff like off your plate in a way, like you need to get through these things because they're work assignments, and
Mm.
institutions are human, they have failings, and I think that I think I have a lot more sympathy for some of the characters in the book because of that than even readers do. But yeah, I definitely wanted to kind of pull that apart and the gaslighting bit and just kind of, I don't know. It's there is no perfect victim, right? And it is very difficult when people do things that maybe you think you wouldn't, or that you don't think are logical, or that you don't, because you don't have all the facts, right? And you don't have their lived experience. So I kind of wanted to poke at that by putting you with someone and seeing, why she was doing XYZ exactly.
And I want to go back in a moment to talk about that kind of super tight third person narrative that you built. But before that, I want to talk about the husband and the relationship with him. And I can't find my question, so I'm going to have to try and remember it. But, there's so much. Ah, there it is. I've gone over the top. So much going on there, isn't there? Because yeah, he went against his family to be with her and marry her. But we see him in the cafe scene, dismissing her antennae going up, just, undermining her, saying that she's rude, assuming that she must have done something to upset his dad when his dad's attacked her, being in touch with his dad behind her back. And in a
Hmm.
kind of way, almost the most distressing is her visualization isn't the right word because it's audible, but that his voice in her head picking away at her. And he's one of the good guys.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think basically, you see her husband in flashback, so it's not a real plot spoiler, luckily. But
No.
his, relationship with his father, her father-in-law, is essentially the father-in-law is, your classic emotionally manipulative narcissist. And so the husband, in many ways, is kind of a survivor of a kind of abuse. And the way he reacts, like he, you know, can't fully manage emotionally to cut his family out altogether. He still wants that sort of love and approval. And I think that is really common, and especially even in adults, right? You are still seeking that love and approval, and he is still seeking that very much so, especially from his father. And she ends up being a bit collateral damage for that, despite the fact that he does push in some areas away. He chooses his own career that his dad didn't approve of and catches heck for that. So and he marries her even though the dad doesn't like her. Like no one would ever have been good enough, right? That's the personality of these types. No one would ever have been good enough for, the son they see as he sees as kind of a belonging, right? Not even as another person. So I think, the husband is dealing with his own set of very deep issues that he has. And for her, coming from a family where, she lost her mother young, and her dad just kind of checked out after that point. And so she was raised by, her grandmother. For her, she's desperately seeking family. So this is just kind of a massive disappointment because she almost kind of pathologically still hopes like I can become part of this family. Like this is what I want, you know, and my husband stood up for me, you know, and we chose each other. We can do this. And, you know, I don't think she fully appreciates what it's like going up against, you know, what a fruitless thing it is trying to go up against a
Mm.
narcissistic personality like this. So yeah, in many ways, I think the father-in-law is one of the biggest villains of the piece.
Oh yeah, the biggest. I mean, not as maybe not as big as the corner, maybe, but next, definitely. So, to go back to point of view, what made you choose that like super, super tight third person narrative? So we're not just on her shoulder, but we're in her head every minute. Like we're part of her internal monologue, but not in first person. What made you do that?
Well, I think that as somebody who really loves scary stories, scary movies, I think it is very difficult to be scary in a book, right? You're never going to have a jump scare. You're never going to have the swelling music or the camera right over someone's shoulder so you feel like they're being followed in that build up. Movies can do that so incredibly well. They're so good at just terrifying you very easily, right? But in a book, the advantage you have is the interior monologue, interiority, I guess you could
Yeah.
say, right? That is the advantage. It's the advantage for novels as an art form, period, I think, but certainly for instilling fear, because we all know what it's like to be afraid. And we all, I think, pretty much fear this kind of scenario. And so to have her reacting sort of physically and her thoughts racing and all of that was really, I think, necessary to understand the fear you would feel in that situation and that she feels in the situation, and also just the way your kind of thoughts collide a lot when you're in a high stress situation, and so you're, you know, random things are popping into your head as you're trying to figure out what to do. You may feel kind of distance from yourself. You may go hot and cold, you know, all these sort of reactions that you have that are sort of inner reactions I wanted to kind of capture, because I think that that is really how you convey a scary story effectively in a book, period.
And you said earlier that when you write, that you write forward from the beginning to the end. So, you really walk the most incredible high wire act of balancing the forward propulsion with the backstory. So, did you write it as it is, or did you write the backstory and the forward story and then blend it?
You know, I kind of interspersed the flashbacks, I guess you could say, because I really wanted it to get going just out of pure spite from previous rejections. Just get going right off the bat. um no, but I had blended in the background because, as I said, you know, character to me is the really big driver, and for that you often need more than you're just getting in the present tense. And so I think one of the things, you know, people ask like, how much work did your editors do? And I think the thing they helped with the most was the timing of those flashbacks,
Mm,
so that it was more like a mental rest a little bit rather than like, dang it, she's going to the past again. I want to see
yeah,
what happens
yeah.
next, you know. I still think no matter what, when you have flashbacks, there's going to be some of that, of course, but they really help me kind of time them. So the all the flashbacks that were there, you know, for the book in its initial form are still there. It's just they're timed a little differently, and I think they're just a little smoother and more concise than they were in that initial version. But that was such a great thing to have editors for, because it's very hard, I think, especially with pacing, once you're in it drafting, to know beyond. I obviously know if I'm reading it and I'm bored, I'm like, well, this needs to change. But
Yeah.
it's very hard to kind of know, well, is this still really the pace we want here. So that was just fantastic to have that sort of outside perspective.
Well, also, you kind of, as the writer, you kind of know when you feel like you need a bit of a reveal from the backstory to propel the narrative forward. So you need the scene in the kind of cafe,
Yeah,
or
yeah. So much of
you need to find out that how her mum died and about the court case. And you might feel like you need it at a certain point, but that could be, it would be so easy for those bits to be like putting the brakes on all the time, but they never do. So annoyingly good.
I think it's so funny. I was thinking when I was reading a book the other night about how so much of why we keep turning the pages is just curiosity, right? Because X or Y little thing is referenced, and you're like, wait a minute, what was that? What happened? And you're reading to
Yeah.
find out not just how the book ends, but why this person and this person are fighting, or whatever it is. And I think that those flashbacks, like hopefully each one showed some sort of answer to one of those questions that you're curious about so that it isn't, just infuriating.
Yeah, I mean, we've all read those books with like two strands or two timelines or whatever, and kind of gone, I'm just gonna like nip through that chapter because I just need to know what happens next in that the thing. But I didn't once do that with Night Watching, and I feel like that's quite a big achievement. And definitely when we were having a chat about the book, a couple of people said that they thought that those flashbacks were timed really, really well, so they never slowed the plot down. The only time I actually wanted to grab her and shake her was when she decided that he'd gone up to the attic and she was going to get out, and she's finally got out. Um, this is not too far through, so I'm not spoiling. And then she goes to the cupboard under the stairs to get something. But she spends quite a long time telling you why there's a fur coat in that cupboard. And I was like, just put the fur coat on, for God's sake. I don't care who bought it and why it's there. Put it on.
It's funny. Yeah.
If anybody's got questions for Tracy, please do pop them in the box. Otherwise, we're just going to keep on yakking. Oh, I should say, Lisa put a really good comment earlier, and I'm going to scroll back to it so I don't miss it. Which was it was just a compliment about your wonderful prose. Was where you said time pulled around and over her like a wet sheet. It is really, I mean, she said she thinks it's genius and she shuddered, and it just does make you kind of go, oh, clammy. Um,
Yeah, I get that it's definitely a sort of claustrophobic beginning and a lot of that imagery. And yeah, I think a lot of that did come out of lockdown sort of feelings.
yeah.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, you've mentioned horror and that you like scary and true crime. You are a woman after my own heart. They're like my favorite things. Um, why do you think, and horror is really having a moment again, isn't it? Particularly horror. Why do you think it's having such a resurgence with women?
I think, and I've noticed this, not that I've been on social media long, like a year and a half, but I think, and your work is an example of this too. Women are a lot more willing to just be honest about their lived experiences, right? I think in a way that maybe they weren't previously. And I don't particularly know why that is. But as much as I thought I knew about pregnancy and what it would be like to have an infant, my own lived experience was so completely different than that, right? And so when I wrote The Burr, the short story, which is much more horror than Night Watching is, um, it was just such a natural thing to have body horror. And I started thinking about it and like, it's just a really natural kind of fit for sort of feminist commentary, period. It's been used so long. If you think about something like Alien, like Sigourney Weaver, right? And the images there are like body horror based on birth, right? And or Rosemary's Baby or these kind of things. But it's always in this sort of like, I don't know how to put it, but like a gross out way rather than a you are being transformed kind of way. And I think as women, we go through so many transformations in life, they're like men don't have menopause. It's just not a thing that they go through. So, I mean, we go through all these different stages of life where your hormones change, your body changes, your body does things you didn't know it would do or that you never experienced, and then it stops doing those things. And I think that it's just a really natural fit because there is just like an element of kind of possession that you feel or that you are almost kind of separate from your physical self in many ways sometimes. And yeah, I think it's just really, yeah, a very kind of natural fit for women to express discomfort through these very allegorical means in horror.
Have you got any kind of particular favorites, either movies or books?
Oh, yeah, I mean, after I wrote The Burr, people said, "Oh, did you read Karen Russell's Orange World before you wrote this?" And I said, "No, I hadn't." And then I read it and I said, "Now I understand why people were asking that." But I loved that story as far as sort of like feminist horror goes. And certainly, The Burr itself was very much based on the Yellow Wallpaper. Um, and in many ways, it's sort of just a beat by beat modernization, if you will, of like the yellow wallpaper. Instead of being enclosed away and not allowed to do a single thing or lift a single finger like was happening in the yellow wallpaper, women are expected to do absolutely everything all the time, 24/7 in the modern world, right? With neither option having actual care for the issues, right, at the base problem. So, yeah, those two just kind of pop to mind as far as horror goes. And honestly, I think thriller is a very naturally sort of feminist space too. I remember my husband was very nervous about reading the book, I think because he was afraid he wouldn't like it. and um and he was, he's a doctor and he was talking in the OR and most of the team is women in the OR and they were saying, "Oh, it's a thriller?" And he said, "Yeah." And they said, "What happens to the husband in the book?" And he came home very worried. He's like, what's going on with the husband in the book?" And I joked with him. I said, "Oh, well, in the thriller genre, the husbands are generally wonderful people who come in and rescue her." That never happens in the genre ever. It was just so funny, like that conversation.
Bless him.
He ended up liking the book though, so big fan.
Well, just as well. Eh?
Yeah.
I just question that pops up. Yeah, so Laurie says she thought the scariest part of the book was actually the disbelief. We talked a little bit before about her questioning herself, the police officer's disbelief, and the way her observation of small things, even just vibes, it's the skill that saves her, but it has a cost too. Because if we actually did assign significance to every tiny weird out of place thing or every off vibe, we'd never have a moment's peace. And that
Yeah.
kind of to live almost, you have to know when to listen to yourself and when not to.
Yes. Yes, exactly. I remember so a TV show I loved that was on an age ago. It was on HBO here in the US called Deadwood. And there was one scene that I always
Yeah.
remember where this woman is trying to kind of mentor a younger woman and she was saying, um, have you ever gotten that sense like before a storm that something is just a little wrong, a little off? Like that is your moment to get out of there. right? To not worry about how it'll look that you're getting out of there. That is your moment to get out of there. And I always thought that was so insightful because there's always times where you're interacting with somebody who's creepy or strange or whatever. But I think there's always a very different vibe when you feel that like electricity of no, something is really off here. And if you don't take advantage of that or take it seriously, you know, very often does not turn out well. You're not right 100% of the time, but I wouldn't even call it like women's intuition or something. I think it's just learned observation, right, over a lifetime, because I've certainly gotten a lot better at it as I've gotten older, kind of sensing when something is just off or isn't right and kind of being willing to just exit that situation.
Yeah, I wonder if it's that. I mean, you've maybe, like you say, you've got better at sensing it, but I wonder if also it's the willingness to act on it. It's like, actually, I don't care if they think I'm weird. I'm gone. Like Mel's just said, better to be wrong and safe than stick around and be, you know, just to not be seen as rude.
Yeah, no, it's true, and I think we're just taught like, and the heroine too is taught like she's kind of in a way the kind of quintessential good girl. She always tries to do the thing you're supposed to do, right? And it can really not serve us. And certainly as you get older, you just care a lot less about, impressing people. I joke like because I got the deal for night watching. It was like when I was 40. And I joke, but I'm kidding on the square, right? I'm actually quite serious. I don't think I could have done it before now because I cared too much what people thought of me. Whereas now, no, I have different priorities. I have a different level of self-consciousness, than I did when I was younger, and trying a lot harder, I think, to kind of please everyone else and not really kind of uh, being as genuine.
Elaine and Di have just said that they are never leaving their keys outside for their son again. Before we wrap up, I just want to ask you, loads of questions I haven't asked as usual. I just want to ask you about the film rights because you've sold them and it's quite exciting, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, it was the film rights were sold to Ridley Scott's company, Scott Free, and another production company has joined them now called Picture Start that has done, a lot of movies and things. And it's been really great for me because I don't know anything about movies, so just making a fool of myself, chatting with them time to time has been fantastic. But yeah,
So
we're
what stage is it at?
Um, you know, I can't really say basically at this point because
Mm,
we're kind of like a transition stage. And honestly, right now, it's like Hollywood's in having a hard time now too with these fires and everything else. So
mm,
I certainly haven't been bugging them of late. I never
no.
bug them. Anytime they get in touch with me, I just get very excited. I don't never
Fair
want to.
enough. Fair enough.
But yeah, it's been really exciting and very, very surreal to talk to kind of people in that business. But certainly interesting for me from a writing perspective, because man, what a different exercise, screenplays and such are. So
Really different. Are you going to be involved in the screenplay at all?
no, I'm not. I honestly had after the film agent got in touch about our initial call before it had even sold, I was Googling screenplays. Like I never read one. I'd never just read a screenplay
They're
even. And
fascinating to read, aren't they?
yes, yeah, they really are. Yeah, so I mean, I don't have any experience in that. Maybe at some point down the line, I think it would be really neat. I especially love the idea of kind of a writer's room or something. That would be really interesting to be part of and just kind of coming up with ideas because the novel writing life is a lonely life. You don't get
Mm.
to kind of spitball ideas around so much. Certainly, I've been able to connect with so many writers, but on sort of the creative front, it's a little different than they have in that world. So
Very different. Thank you so much. We are all out of time. Um, if you don't mind, Tracy, I'm just going to use like 30 seconds to tell everybody about next month's February's book club pick. Um, I'm a bit excited about this one. I'm excited every month. They're just used to me saying I'm really excited. Okay, so February's book, I feel quite like proud of myself that I've persuaded her to do it. February's book is a new book by Jojo Moyes. We All Live Here. And Jojo is going to be joining us for a book club live mid-March. I'll be emailing tomorrow morning as usual, and that will have the date and everything in. But usual deal, you're here, so you can jump the queue, but just check out tomorrow's email and get it in your diary because we had to like fit Jojo's like her tour is nuts and she's everywhere. So we've got the date booked, it's set in stone, and it won't move. So pencil it in your diary. Um, yeah, and Lisa's off to TikTok to check out your spooky house. It's also lots of them are on Instagram. Thank you, Tracy, so much. I absolutely love talking to you, and really, I'd quite like you to take us round now so we can look at more house, but that just wouldn't be reasonable.
too messy.
Thank you.
Thank you
And
so
thank you
much,
for
everyone.
writing such a terrifying and brilliant book. Thank
Thank
you.
you for
Thanks,
having me.
everybody, for coming. Good night.
Bye bye.